I'm Addison Brazil. Grief Club, the podcast, starts now. Welcome back to another episode of First Year of Grief Club, which is already a blooper, Patty, because that's not what this is called. It is called Grief Club, the podcast, and I'm leaving it in because if we stop every time I blooper today, we'll never get anywhere. So welcome back to another episode of Grief Club, the podcast, which is usually where we take chapters of my book, First Year of Grief Club, A Gift from a Friend Who Gets It, and dive deeper based on the experiments in the book. But today is, well, really, we're lying. 2/2/22, a few days ago, was my book's first birthday. Happy birthday, First Year of
Happy
Grief Club.
birthday, book baby.
Birthday. And that other voice on the line is none other than Patti Hall, who without this baby wouldn't be celebrating its first birthday, nor would it exist, nor would it have grown inside a womb. I was trying to think about that today, actually. I was like, is she the godmother of my book? But then I often call a friend of mine, the lovely friend who let me write the book in her house, like the godmother of the book. Like she's kind of like the surrogate slash, like I don't know how you would transfer book coach, editor, alchemist.
How about midwife?
Midwife.
All right.
So midwife
right.
Patti Hall is here today. Okay. The only thing I'm going to try to keep traditional about this episode is the check-ins. So we are going to check in. So if you want to take a deep breath with me. In one word, how are you feeling physically?
Tense.
I'm going to say tight. In one word, how are you feeling emotionally?
Balanced. Neither strongly positive or negative. Balanced. Neutral position. Not one word.
Worried. I'm never that honest, but I feel worried. And mentally, how are you feeling?
Frenzied. Very busy mind today. I have a very busy mind.
I was going to say hyperactive. So we'll see where this goes.
Well, lucky everyone.
With both of us. Okay, so at one point I was like, how can I make this episode more fun? Because it's a birthday party. And so obviously I didn't want to do the usual thing. And then everyone's been talking about ChatGPT, as you know, even in our circles. And so I thought, well, let's bring ChatGPT on to play with us. The funny thing is, okay, this is very true. And it's going to seem like it's not, but it's actually kind of scary. So ChatGPT is down. But the only thing I have in my episode about this notes is instead of Patti and I talking about ourselves, what if we both created an acrostic poem about the other person? So I'd go through the letters of your name and give you the qualities. You know what an acrostic poem is, I'm sure, at this stage in your career. Anyway, but the crazy thing is I go to ChatGPT today because I was like really in a weird mood this morning, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. And it's like, let's put AI to the test. Can AI do my job for me today? Because I don't want to do it.
Oh.
And then I get this lesson. I get this screen that literally says, I'm going to share it with you so that you can see because it makes me laugh so hard. Get this message that literally says, ChatGPT is at capacity.
It's an acrostic poem about ChatGPT.
Yeah, write an acrostic poem about the status of ChatGPT. So I thought that was so funny that even in its moment where it can't help us and it can't replace us, it's weirdly doing the exact thing that I wanted to do with it.
And I'm weirdly worried that I can't do all the letters of your name without ChatGPT.
Well, we're gonna try. I can. Do you want to go letter for letter, or do you want me to do you and then you do me?
Let's go letter for letter. That might give me a little bit of oomph because the D's might be a little bit hard. Can I misspell your name just to get an easy out?
This is the type of Monday where I had to just spell out Patti just to make sure on a post-it note here. There's
now I'm feeling the pressure.
Funny enough, I was actually writing from one of the last episodes with our good friend Shelly Paxton. I decided to write myself a permission slip, but I didn't finish it because it's Monday and you came online. So now it says I give myself permission to Patti.
Well, aren't you lucky? Because I rarely give myself permission to Patti.
Give myself permission to Patti. Okay.
The Patti and Addie show. Okay.
There's no rules to this. So, okay, I'm going to go for P and Patti. I'm going to say parent, and what is the word? A force of a parent. If I could comma and then add to that.
I like it. You're A, I'm going to say allow, because I find you give people a lot of space to be who they are. You allow people to be who they are.
Better not make me cry, Patty. A, you know what A word I want to use.
Go for it.
Well, in the best possible way, I want to say asshole because you are not afraid when it's absolutely necessary to be that friend who, yeah, can be a bit of an asshole because it's for the other person's benefit. And what I love about that is that you give me permission to be the asshole I know I can be when people are in that same position. And I love that we have that for each other where we can go, okay,
Mm.
I mean, how many times have you said to me, I'm going to be a little bit of an asshole here and then finished a sentence? Probably wouldn't be a baby book
I mean,
without
it's
that.
true. I mean, how can anybody do it if they didn't have someone in their life that could push just a little past what we invite? I don't happen to think asshole is a bad thing at all because
No.
it's everything I try not to be, and when I do it, I know how much love I do it with. So that's awesome. I'm gonna say D. Can you take the share screen down so I can look at your face?
Oh my gosh.
So
I
I'm
am
gonna
so glad that you said that. This whole YouTube episode would have been of the ChatGPT acrostic poem.
right. So I'm going to say D, and I'm going to say divine, because I've always felt that there was something bigger than both of us that brought us together. And there's a gift of you that I never take for granted.
I love that. He. I'm like, can there just be like a little IN in brackets? And then you're like, no, that's not how writing works. And then tune, like in tune.
Mm,
I just feel like, yeah, like you said, like there's this deep connection with you that once you let somebody in, as you have with me so generously, that you're just very, very in tune. Like one of those people where the messages will show up right when something's happening, or like there'll be a space, but then right when it's like, how do you know that was going on? Like just very, very in tune. And which we can get into a little bit more, in the writing process and in like carefully helping me, you know, hold babies that have a lot of, trauma and grief wrapped up in them, very in tune with, is today a good day to unwrap this a little bit for the sake of it being told in a way that will help people? Or is today a day where we treat Addison like Addison, and
yeah,
not the author, not the artist, not any of that?
thanks. I receive that. That means a lot because it is something I think coming to the work of book coaching that you realize really quickly you've got to have, and it's either there or it's not there. I mean, can know a lot about what I know a lot about, but if I can't be in tune with the person on the screen, I'm not that good to them.
Mhm.
D, definite. You are always certain of what you can manage right now, the direction that you're going in the moment, and firm with yourself about it. You're always right now, and you don't project, you don't cast yourself so far forward that it's scary or intimidating or impossible to see. You're always definite in the right now. You know that right now doing this is exactly where you're supposed to be. And I always admire that. Whether you're traveling, you're loving, you're feeling what you're feeling, you're so good at just saying, I'm here right now. You're definite.
Hmm. My gosh. I was worried about two letters being the same, but clearly you weren't. Um, um, T, I want to say tenacious because I think both in spirit, like both personally and professionally, but just like you have, I want to be like Patty has, like, because there's listeners, but you just have such a way of being willing to find a way. And as you know,
Mm,
that's like a silent working title of my life and my book is Find a Way, because
yeah.
otherwise, you're not around. So Find a Way has just been such a through line. But for you, like, with the other people in Story House and your other clients that I know really well and have become family to me, there's this, okay, this story is being told, this story
Right.
is going to reach its audience, and there's this tenaciousness, is that a word, my editor?
It
There's
is.
this
Yes.
tenaciousness around what is the format where that happens, not whether or
Mm,
not it's going to happen, but let's find the format where this lives. And I love that.
I think we can say a lot more about this when we talk about your book, baby, right? When we talk
Mhm.
about it. I've done the ADD, no pun intended. I've done add. Now I'm going to do I, intense. I don't think anyone would doubt this. So I was going to say intensity because you always bring it. And this is something I think you and I share is that, and you can use that for my eye if you want, but there is always an intensity that unless you turn it off, you bring it. And I love that because you meet me where I am. And I know that if that's too much for some other people, that's just too much. But if you weren't intense, you couldn't be in the depth of grief with people as the
Mm,
bestie that they need, because there's nothing lighthearted about it, except when we specifically get dark and humorous about it. But that's another side of intensity, isn't it? And
hmm.
that little bit of intensity, I think the root of it is probably the same as intentional. And I think that's a really powerful word for you too.
So I want to say integrity. Um, yeah, that's, I mean,
Mm,
yeah,
thank you.
you are you are intense in the same ways that, and intentional, like you said. But integrity is something that I feel like it's something that people say that like doesn't really mean anything, like, in
Yeah.
your integrity. But to me, I always go back to like restoring one to wholeness or being willing and able at any point to, whether it's take a deep breath, to reset, to take a mental health break, to do whatever it is, the willingness to find integrity. And it's not this perfect whole thing now, but it's like that intention of refinding, integrity in this moment is very different than like my integrity, like how dare you on my integrity, but like
Integrous as in wholeness held together.
yeah, and
Ah,
the
nice.
willingness to return to that. Also, I make the rules here, and I'm on your eye. You did. Let's face it, Addie and Patty. We don't need SON. We don't need
But
this to become.
but they're
We don't need
good.
this. We don't need
But
this.
but they're good.
But
In
you can
fact,
take
my
son
my
of and finish there.
I was just going to say sun. I was just going to say sun.
There
So
you
I
go.
was
There
going
you
to
go.
do S with sun, and it does. Other was my O, and I didn't have an N yet. So it's not nerves or nirvana, but you can make it whatever it is. I'm just going to say nerd and get it out there.
I can't believe that you had all those written out that quick. I think honestly, ChatGPT does have a huge competitor. I
Right?
I was improving. I didn't know you already had letters. So you
Oh, yeah.
cheated without cheating somehow because I was
I
the only
know.
one who knew.
I know there goes my integrity, right? I know now everybody knows I'm a big cheater. Yeah, so I see allow, divine, definite, intense, sun as in SON, other meaning diverse as in representing and bringing it home to all other, and something like nerd.
Hmm.
Because we do like Disney. You and I do have a lot of favorite things like Buzz and Woody. We have a lot of favorite things, okay? And there's a little bit of a nerd shop there, and you are incredibly well read, which usually goes with nerd. So
Hmm. I really take that as like I guess because I just never like back in the LA days never was cast as or never spoken at like in nerd. Like it's like nobody ever called me a nerd. I love that. Um
sorry, son,
it's
but you're a nerd.
I'm a nerd. I'm
Sun nerd.
down to be a nerd.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so the one thing that I did want to say too is because this has never happened and it probably will never happen. This is probably as close to a live show or a live cast I'll do because we're going to get off this. And because my podcast comes out on Mondays and it's already Monday, I'm going to edit it and it's going to come out today. So I just wanted to take like a minute, like, because usually when we go into the honor the journey section, it's, the past and like people who know about this show know that it was pre-recorded like some up to a year ago. Like I really took my time with this. So often it like I'm never saying anything current.
Yeah,
So I was just like right now in the world, like what's coming up? Like what are you honoring in that way? I'm just so interested.
I'm still honoring the stuff around New Year turning. I feel really like I'm attracting this to me. I noticed Substack posts today and emails today about the word of the year. And I'm like, we're into February now. We're into February and I'm all for the word of the year. I'm for the word of the day. But I'm noticing a lot of people talking about that turn of the new year still. And I wondered, is this because we're trying to slow down? Is this because it's all become so damned important that we mark the turn of the new year with goals and milestones and other things that are the new year? Or is it that we I hope, are still musing about what this year could be, even though it's February, which I happen to think would be a great thing because I think we kind of only muse about the wonder of it all and what everything could be for us.
Mhm.
Maybe we only do that on January 1st. So I don't know what it is, but I've really been sitting with this the last couple of days is we're into February now and people are still talking about the new year. That's I'm just going to drop that here. I don't know what it's about, but and maybe it's just a message for me that I haven't done goal setting for the year, but I'm really trying not to. I'm really trying to just move into this year and receive.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. And, I think I do probably say this in this book. I don't know anymore what I wrote and what I say. But with grief, like the idea of linear time, that's something I let go of
Yes.
very early in my journey, was just
Mm,
because not only are the time bombs of anniversaries, birthdays, and all that, like, those sorts of things, those timelines that come up, but then they also sort of bring in this measuring aspect to grief. But also for
right.
me, like, it's not even that deep. Like, I literally just feel so disconnected from, like, that being a year or like that mattering in that way. I did
Mm,
join this cool thing called the Coffin Club, which is a group of
okay.
men from all around the world, and we're doing this really cool year. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to say or not say. And of course, this is an episode where it actually does come out today, so hopefully I'm allowed. But one of the things I have to do in this is to write my own eulogy right now, and
Whoa.
like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not like the I'm pretty good at writing eulogies, just so you know, but I eulogize well. But this is meant to be like the truth in third person. And so it's just been this like weird thing that's kind of been on my mind of like what is the good, the bad, and the ugly, and like
Mm,
in the same way you're saying, but it's like what is good and what is bad. Like it's getting to that
right.
point where it's like I don't know if that's the bad or the good, because like this came out of that, or like why is that a bad thing? That's a learning thing, and it's just so funny because what it's doing, and like again, like this would be like a random new year for me having these thoughts, not the 31st of a month that's set, but
Yes.
like okay, obviously there is some deep healing and work going on, that like that's the way that you're approaching this, that you can't even do this exercise without going, well, wait, I'm not going to judge the bad,
Right.
or that's not ugly anymore, that's something I've so it's like
Yeah.
what is it's this weird like sorting through. However, the reason I brought that up, and maybe at this birthday party, instead of actually playing pin the tail on the donkey, you just feel free to yell pin the tail on the donkey whenever I'm rambling.
Pin the tail, pin the tail.
Just we already have an explicit rating because I put asshole into your acrostic poem, so I guess now we can go
Oh.
for it. But to pin the tail on the donkey, we do have a word of the year. So one, I was going to ask you if you have a word, and
Mm.
share that mine is that I shared with that group was convergence,
Ah,
um, and sort of like integrity, like we talked about earlier. But this idea of like all the parts of something being whole, and as like the space for all of them to exist, the final blending of like what I've been working through, where I always say this, honor the journey, and the find the funny, feeling like separate sectors of a company or a person, or and like that all gets to live and breathe together now, kind of
mm.
thing. And that really being like my word. So did you have a word?
I did. I did. I'm not sure I love it anymore, but that's half of it. It's intention.
Mm,
And mostly my intention is to receive. And I didn't want it to be received because I thought I would end up playing that into something else. It is, it's literally to not plan, intention to not plan,
mm.
intention to receive, to allow for the change that's coming. And because I am a planner, I'm an organizer, I'm a builder, I'm a doer, and I need to work against that for myself this year, is to just allow. I'm using the words that came up in your Addison acrostic actually, but intention was mine.
I love that. And this book took me all over the year this year. And I got to be quite nomadic, while still having a home base, but got to be quite nomadic.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like, that's why I'm nodding. And I know people mostly listen to this. So I was nodding like a lot when Patty was saying all that, because I have to say, like, in all the moments of the last year and a half where I didn't have a plan, and I mean, like, didn't have a plan as to, like, wait, where am I sleeping tonight? Because
Yes.
we're in one city and now we're in another city. Like, what's going on? But it became this, like, sort of like exciting thing for me, is when I realized every time there was no plan, that's when the magic happened.
That's
Like
it.
that's where the good stuff was every
Yes.
single time. And I think that with grief, there's this, for me, at least a 13-year, battle of giving up my sense of control. giving
Yes.
up this because you couldn't control the big thing or the little thing or the medium thing. Why are we measuring grief? That's another episode. Whatever it was, you couldn't control that. So it's like this idea that you're holding on to control by being a planner, by,
Yes. That's
like
it.
Mandy Leto talks about, by being perfectionist, by, measuring this enoughness, like that you have this,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, this power that really doesn't exist. And then you let go of all that. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I have no idea. And having
Yeah.
no idea is magic. Like,
That's it. That's it. And I mean, and if we're so busy doing because we have a plan, then we have to execute the plan, then we're not doing the feeling, right?
mm,
So, but the doing in grief is just another way of stopping ourselves from the feeling. And I'm working on a book with an author now who talks about, I was how she was the quintessential daughter after her father's death, how, she planned all this and she did those things and everything was a legacy and an homage to her father. And what it really did was buy her time until the grief started in another way. And I catch myself having my parents come to mind, having lost my own father myriad years ago. What is it? Is it 13 years now? My sister will correct me. Is that sometimes I get myself into the busyness, and then even worse than the busyness, I look to others. So
mm,
I've noticed that back to this intention of letting things unfold, I've noticed that, and this is actually week 18 in your book, and I opened to that because this one's really pivotal for me, is that
mm,
I can trick myself into, I use my intention to allow things to unfold as they should. But then the trick is I sneak over here and I ask somebody else for advice. I'll bring someone else in. Should I do it this way? And I'll start to measure against how somebody else is doing. I'll wonder, are my siblings doing the same way in their grief that I am this many years out? And then the other thing is having people around you to support you. Sometimes you allow that to start to be a measure of how you should do things. And I
mm,
come back to this about your book all the time, is that many people have a lot of support in their grief and in their life day to day. But having support doesn't mean not doing it your own way. It's cushion, but it is not a thing to lean so far into that you don't do it your own way, because as you and I know, you set your intention to wholeheartedly approach your grief to really do this thing, but you look for any way out of the pain.
mhm,
And one of my cheats has been to start to, over this period of time, to look to other people as a measure of whether or not I'm doing okay. And that's another reason I set intention as my word this year. It was, I can't do my business the way other people do. I can't take advice on this is the way. I can't hire you or someone else to strategize about how I should show up in the world. I've got to do that intentional work every day
mm,
in my grief, in my pain, and in the difficult things that I write about and work on books with people, right? We all have to sit in the intention. And I know that with your book, we came back to that a lot. We came back to, you wanted to be the guy who shows up for other people just because you get it, not to bring advice, but just to get it. So I'm sitting really wholeheartedly with that and catching myself in the tricks, because I still play tricks on myself. If I'm not sitting in grief or pain or whatever else is going on, because there are myriad kinds of grief in life, I start to trick myself saying, oh, I'm not measuring myself against anyone else anymore. I'm just asking my sister how she's doing. That's not true, right?
right. And that's, one of the things I always sort of bring up is about doing any sort of work or being on an inner city healing journey is there's this moment where you become too smart to be dumb. And it sounds like a
Yes.
good thing, but it sucks. And it's a different type of grief for a long time because that you know. And really
Mm-hmm.
that's just you and you. It's you and yourself in the mirror. There's no
Yes.
one else really involved. You're just aware like you're totally doing that thing to not do that thing. And then like you said, sometimes it's like really tricky, like I refer to myself sometimes master of vices where I don't even know that I'm doing something on top of doing something well, doing something else that I'm like, but you get to that point sometimes where you just go, I know exactly what's
Oh,
happening
nana,
here.
nana,
Let's
boo boo.
just
I
take
caught
that
myself
breath.
doing it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And
Yeah. And it's not
the
fun.
tricks we play on ourselves are the most insidious, right? Because if we don't call ourselves on them, we repeat and we repeat, they become a self-soothing mechanism. And
Mm-hmm.
before you know it, we're not getting down to the real work of the truth in us, which I think sometimes it takes a really loving asshole in your life to call it out. And I think writing is one of these call outs. it calls us on our BS. It calls us on the tricks we're trying to play on ourselves, because if you can't get down to true honesty on the page, you're not going to write the book you were meant to, which is why we don't write books quickly, and we don't do them in a weekend, and we don't do them in a template. And whether you're writing nonfiction or you're not, the book is coming through you. And this is a great place for you to say, this wasn't the first book you planned. This was the book you needed to write.
Mm.
And I think there are an awful lot of us that are glad you did.
Yeah, and that's a fun fact for anybody listening. And I'll plug my book baby's ears, but this book baby was never meant to be. This book baby happened accidentally out of a memoir writing process that we were doing and still doing, which is actually funny because I think that's how I was born as well. I think there was a miscarriage and then there was supposed to be nothing for a while and they were supposed to take a break and then I came unexpectedly. So that's very, very weird and interesting that as I
I
said
was
that, I
I was a
realized
little
that
bit of a
connection.
surprise too. Aren't
Yeah,
we all
so
glad?
surprised. Yeah, very surprising, and try to live up to that every day since. Um, so how do we do this? I think what I want to ask, because like, we're so intertwined enough that I don't want to go into like a full episode on either side of us. I wanted to play and also pretend, it is the book baby's birthday. So we're gonna
Happy birthday,
keep
book
doing that.
baby. Yeah.
But I wanted to do this because what I do in every episode, obviously, and I do it before every experiment in the book, is I always go back and remind people to check in, to do the conscious emotional check-ins that I've set
Yes.
up.
Yes.
But when I was looking back at the book, which like, I felt kind of guilty, like I haven't really looked at it in a while, and I was like, oh, what's this? This actually isn't bad, or I would totally redo that, all those things,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you have with all of your authors.
Sure.
But in the introduction, when I introduced this idea of gray space, where it's always a living, breathing thing, so don't ever be afraid to sort of define your grief in a moment because it's just of the moment. You're not setting, in stone forever what this means to you and what a loss means to you and what it is, because it's ever changing. And I wanted to go back with you, and I thought it would be interesting to do because in the introduction I have on page XI, also known as
Mhm.
6 in some cultures.
11, also known as 11 in Canadian.
Oh my gosh, is that 11?
Only in Canada. It's okay, hon.
Only everywhere, even in Rome. Uh, wait, is that Rome or Greek? Okay. Okay.
It's
Well, if
Rome.
anyone was considering giving me an award for being, so smart this week, they're probably taking it back.
You're not
So on
Italian. You
page
don't have to know this
11
stuff. Whatever.
or
Okay.
6, I do love Italian food though. So anyway, there's space for your notes on your definition of a grief. And I thought we
Yeah.
could kind of in this honor the journey section kind of just answer these for each other in the safety of gray space of what comes up for us right now if we were just kind of honest about grief, because we both have this, and you can give a little bit more of an intro into sort of the longer grief, the grief that you've gone through, that, as we know, just something that you honor no matter how long it's been. But and then we can just kind of check in this way, so it acts also as a reminder and sort of the tool of this episode of going back and redefining that gray space defining
Mm,
that you might have done. And for some people this will be a whole year that they've been doing this already,
absolutely.
because this officially means that people who bought it when it came out would be at the end
Right.
of their year, which I'm excited to hear from anybody who is at that. I've
Mhm.
had a few, but this would really be like sort of next week, I think, would be where people who really did the full year. Um, and to what you were saying earlier, I just want to say for people like that, there is this idea of sort of this first lonely and this second lonely that I always talk about. There's
Oh,
this
yeah.
first lonely that drives you to like seek out help, and you end up like, in the self-help book section, and you have a coach and you have all these things and you learn so much and you grow so much in that time. And then, like we were talking about, there's this moment later where, you're looking at yourself in the mirror and like we were talking about. And there's this second loneliness. Like maybe it's like the people who didn't come along in the learning, the people that had to be let go in the learning, the sort of the quiet babysitting you're kind of doing where you stop judging people, but you're noticing and you have to just sort of like,
Oh, yeah.
change your life around. So if you finish this book and it isn't like, thank God he's fixed me, because that's definitely not the point. It says in big letters, grief is something you
On the
honor,
back.
not something you fix. But if you're feeling that second loneliness, is weird and mixed as it feels, I just want to remind people that that's a sign of of progress. That is, a spot that you hit. So I need to pin the tail on the
Mm.
donkey because I'm playing 3 birthday games at the same time. One.
It's okay. I like them all. But other than Pin the Tail on the Donkey, what other birthday games are you playing?
Well, I know at the end I want to make sure there's loot bags.
Okay, this could be the piñata. That can be your piñata then, because
Okay, yeah, yeah,
I want there
Patty,
to be candy.
Patty,
I want
tell us
candy.
a little bit about your grief, and then we'll define it in gray space, and we'll
Yeah,
call this hitting the pinata.
this is piñata hitting. This is kind of what it is. So, grief and I have a long history together. Um, I became a student of grief by choice. I was raised by a mother who spent a great deal of time in the palliative care space. So I was acquainted with conventional grief, how would I call it that, around loss and illness and death really early on. Something I'm infinitely grateful for because I don't have or carry with me those feelings of panic when around death. I don't dread it. I don't, um, let's just say I'm not like other people when it comes to death. And that was a gift to me because it meant that I myself could be a palliative care worker and wrote early on. I wrote books alongside and bedside caring for people who were dying of terminal illness, and that was really moving for me to see that they weren't grieving, I was grieving. So an early understanding for me of grief being something that the living do was important. But then I learned about this anticipatory grief thing, which I do think can be shared with a person while they're in the active experience of dying. But they're also the smartest people in the world when they're in the active experience of dying. And what it taught me was the celebration, the opportunity, the loyalty of loving someone. That's what lives on. So that while dying, people I've been with in their last months have said to me that it was an act of celebration of having loved so well that they could let go and wish the best for the people they were leaving behind, is something that I think changed me as a person and gave me a wholehearted approach to death and dying and grief. It did not make it possible for me to not bleed from the inside out when I experienced pivotal losses in my life, but it did help me feel okay about being in agony. What I love about this page in your book, Space for Notes About Your Definition of Grief, is that even though I have studied grief, I am a student of Kubler-Ross, I am a student of almost everything that's been written about loss and bereavement, and trained as a bereavement counselor and spent a lot of time writing about my own losses. My brain still tells me that grief is going to feel like a breakup. My brain says you're going to get brokenhearted, you're going to feel a hurt. The sting, that poignant sting of a breakup, is going to be what grief is, but it isn't. Although it sometimes can be, it will change and morph and develop so that at some point I go from the sting to that smile inside that you get of a memory that is so comfort because you've known a love like that. And this, I'm obviously talking about the chronic, the big G grief. I forget how you say it in the book, but due to losing someone, I have experienced everything from job loss to academic things that didn't work out, breakups, losing many pets. I have experienced the grief of near-death experiences with my child, the preparing for loss when you feel the imminent disaster that is going to be a change in your life. And I suppose I know anticipatory grief far too well because I think I did that from childhood until my parents died. I was always one to prepare for how I was going to be when my parents died. So my definitions on this page are the thing that, even though I have all this experience, pin the tail, is I bet you I sound on this page like so many other people do the first time they look at it. My body says grief feels like a hunger that can't be satisfied, is what I know it is now. My spirituality, religion, my intuition says that grief is permanent, that it is toxic, that it is painful and you got to get over it, that you got to get through it. This is an endurance game. And that's what I think my early spiritual upbringing gave me was there were a lot of shoulds around grief for me in early days that I now have overcome, thank God. And another reason why your book is so important in the world is keep the grief with you. There's no reason not to. It doesn't get fixed. It just becomes part of you. So I think grief for me now has something to do with loyalty and a lot to do with love, which, so to not be a hypocrite in writing memoir, what I learned was all of our experiences contribute to the person we become. And some of those experiences are grief causing, love inducing, heartbreaking, gut wrenching, mind expanding, and whatever they are, I've been able to make meaning of all of those and like the person that I became. So for me now, grief is just another component of who I've become. That's how I look at it now. So I don't ask it to leave me and I don't ask it to be gone, because without the knowledge of the deep love and admiration that's come from loss due to death, job loss, loss due to loving animals the way I do, commitments to things that didn't work out, I wouldn't be who I was. So I feel like grief is just another building block for the Patti I am.
Damn. Well, if that was a pinata, there was nothing left. I mean, you just really, all the other kids are watching in horror as just
As I
all
take
the,
home all the candy.
yeah, as all the candy hits the ground. But there was so much there. Like every piece of candy that you just knocked out of the pinata and everything
Mm,
that you shared is like, I'm like sitting there going like producer style, like she's going for the sound bites. She's going for the sound bites. Listen to the, no,
man,
but because it's so real and so connected to like living that experience, you know,
yeah,
and having
yeah.
taken the time to live in it, try living out of it. Like it's like, what was that song when I was a kid that was like, can't go over it, can't go under? You remember that? Like
Yep,
I always think of that about grief, where it's like, but you have to try,
you
you know,
do.
you have to
Yeah,
try all the things. And I'm trying to deflect and get out of, because I'm saying the pinata is already broken, by not answering these for myself. But I am going to take 1 minute and just do the prompts, because
good.
everybody already knows my grief journey. Um, my okay, in this moment, sorry, I'm just gonna use your word and get a little intentional because I just want this to be of
Awesome.
the moment, and it is really going to be of the moment because this episode will come out today. So, in this moment on Monday, February 6th, 2023, uh, my brain tells me grief is something that I can honor without having to focus on anymore every day.
Say that again for me.
Something that I can honor, but that I don't have to focus on every day. Um,
Okay.
which is a sort of a permission slip. It's sort of
Mm,
like, yeah,
yeah.
you're good. You're in the practice. You know,
Mhm,
you don't need to make sure that you're not a fraud by focusing on the
mm,
grief, you know. Um, my body, honestly, especially today, my body says grief feels uh, like a storyboard or like a treasure map of like
nice.
just all the things, you know, and everything on the way and all the opposing forces to get to those treasure spots. But
Hmm.
it feels that way. It's in different pockets, it changes, but it's like the body keeps the score. It's not an amazing book for no reason. You know, it's in there. And right now, my whatever I'm doing mentally, physically, emotionally, and with my humor today, my body right now, you know, it says grief feels like that swirly pit in my stomach. And
Yeah.
that part I
We
can't
carry it,
change
don't
no
we?
matter
There's a
what
weight.
recording it is.
No, I embody that right now. I also think when you speak of it, I can feel how it feels for you. There's
Mm-hmm.
a weightiness to it
Mm-hmm.
that, um, and that's when I think about what you say about honor. And I love what you did in the book with honor and the importance of the Canadian spelling and the inclusion of the U. But it's we have to honor it. It's not going anywhere. So it's like the winter coat here. I'll use the Canada, central Canada. It's really cold right now. We have to wear that winter coat, but if it gets warm outside, we got to carry the coat
Mm.
because you know you're going to need it later. The coat's not going anywhere. You can't afford to lose the coat. And I liken it a little bit to that. And you know what happens if you leave the coat behind on the ride at the fair, right? When it gets cold again, you're going to be freezing.
Mm-hmm.
So I liken it to the self-care of I need to keep this with me because this is part of me too. And today it's particularly heavy for you, a little lighter for me, but that can change in a heartbeat, right?
Hmm.
It can change in a heartbeat. When a dime drops from my pocket later, I'll think of my father. When a book falls over that I was working on 6 years ago and didn't publish, I'll feel the grief and the longing for something that I didn't get done. It's always there to remind us it's not going anywhere. Keep the winter coat over your arm even when it gets warm.
Mm, I love that. You're really not going to let any of us hit the pinata today, are you?
Nope, my turn.
Um, my my spirituality, religion slash intuition says grief is a freedom to be within all of it.
Hmm,
I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't feel like I want to go into more on that, but yeah, a freedom and a space. It's one of the
yeah.
biggest transformational things that I did. As you know, some ketamine therapy. And one of the things that came up from my time with PTSD when I did that was this idea in one of these sessions that death is contained and that grief is contained. It has to go in boxes. And we're obsessed with putting death in boxes.
Hmm.
I mean, we literally
Hmm.
put it in a box and we bury it.
Right.
That's how society works. But it's got to be a certain type of death due to a certain thing. Like it's everything about it. It's either checking boxes, putting it in boxes, packing away someone's life into boxes. It's so contained. And I've always been a little bit claustrophobic. And I didn't know how much that sort of on some subconscious level was really affecting sort of my spirituality or my inner wisdom around death and whatever. And I had this experience where it just became so clear to me that it's not contained, but there's texture and there's so much space. We're not
Nice.
stuck. They're not stuck. It doesn't get stuck. The end is not stuck. The end is, open and
Ah,
everlasting kind of thing. And it's weird because I'm also equally terrified of like space and the ocean, like huge vastness. It gives me so
okay.
much anxiety. Like when people say, don't you wish you had, $1 trillion so you could go to Mars? No, absolutely not. I have no interest in going out there. But so in that, and it's this weird pocket, the middle of between the claustrophobia of it and the vastness of it, which is obviously a beautiful metaphor for spirituality in its sense, or religion, or whatever,
Hmm.
whatever gets you through the day. Because anything and everything's welcome here. Yeah, it's that middle of like, no, there's fullness in every bit of it. You're not tracking where you are on a GPS, you're just where you are, and you're
Oh,
not
yeah.
trapped. And so weird, I've never said this out loud, but like that is the only way I can describe sort of my spirituality right now around my grief and my death, is just knowing that it's not contained and that it's not
Right.
going to check a box of a certain church or a certain anything. It's not contained. It's freely available. With this in mind, I would define grief in one or two sentences today as that little monster. No, I'm kidding. Um, that little. Um, you know what? I encourage everyone for grief to remain this living, breathing thing that you
Yes.
redefine at all moments. Grief for me right now, in one to two sentences, I'm, as most people do. I mean, I cared enough to write a book about it, but it is still circling around the loss of anything meaningful and
Yes.
the human natural whatever, wherever, everything, everywhere,
Mm.
all at once. I watched it last night. That movie is like just a perfect example of this. Like it's everything and nothing all at once. It really
Yes.
it really isn't. And then there's nothing unnatural about what follows as your body sort of, it's like some sort of chemical entering your bloodstream, how your body decides to interact with that
Mm.
and restore you to a feeling of resilience or a way of coexisting with whatever's entered,
Yeah.
your livingness. um yeah, that's, it's funny because you think it'd get more defined, and it really, like I'm saying, it doesn't. It gets more like, well, I'm really open to what grief is
Gets
for me
more and more
today.
nebulous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wow,
And
yeah.
I'm really open to not planning or putting it in a box because, as I said earlier, like that is the lesson again and again and again of the last year since this book came out is, you know, when you don't plan, when you don't control, when you don't orchestrate, when you don't direct, that's where the magic shows up, you
Right.
know. And it's a very weird permission slip to write yourself, to keep bringing it back to Shelley Paxton's permission slips, but that I'm
It's
not
beautiful.
going to know. I'm not going to be smarter than myself. I'm not going to plan exactly where I'm going to be. I'm going to sit in this. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Um, and that's been really
You're really
cool.
hitting something for me. I hope I can interrupt, which was you gave this book permission. You gave the first year of Grief Club. Um, you gave it permission to be whatever it was. And I remember how lovingly you just put it into the world. It felt very much like you birthed it. You wrote it in a somewhat short period of time, although I would say you've been percolating it for a long time. But you said this will be whatever it needs to be. It's a gift, it's a launch pad. It is a piece of your wisdom and a slice of you that you put into the world without telling it what it needed to be. And that's a learned experience that I have with writers that is very hard one. That the best we can do is create what we create for ourselves first, with a reader in mind second, and then give it to the universe. But I wonder if the goals you set when you originally were putting pen to paper on this, if it made those goals, exceeded them. First of all, did it make people feel less alone? That was the goal. Did it make you feel less alone, is what I've wondered in the years since you put it out. If you don't mind me turning the tables and asking the question, did it do that for you?
It's interesting because this is like, I'm like, it's like we're fighting over a toy. I'm like, I'm gonna be the host, just so you know. I'm like, one of my ideas
My
for this episode
my
was to
dog is
let you
bigger
be
than
the
your
host,
dog.
and then I said, no. Um, no, but honestly, as you know, when it birthed, it got very raw for me and very too real. And there was something about it that I wanted nothing to do with. And I realized that it was the opposite of what I feared, which was like probably around some sort of imposter syndrome, at the time. But it was the opposite, where people were coming to me and being like, you get this in a real human way. And I hated that a little bit because it
Ah,
made it so real. And suddenly I knew that there was this thing, this service in me that was sort of blocking something else for me.
yeah,
And people looked at it from different vantage points, and like, what do you write a book, and then, then you're speaking and you're touring and you're writing another book? Like, is that the opening? But what I wasn't expecting was the opening to become, now you get to just hang out with them. Okay,
right.
you went back for the others like you promised. People know from interviews and things I've spoken about before, I came very close to suicide. And I definitely sort of at that time bargained. I made a deal, like, get
Yeah.
me through and I'll go back for the others. And I think that seed never really went away, that was something I had pre-promised to,
Yes.
you know, my stakeholders and my shareholders, which are the people that love me, and also the powers that be, because, I did get the chance to do that. But it created this clearing where I actually got to create the opening, be a part of it. Grief Club is not a new concept. We all, anybody who knows this existed. I just sort of maybe was like a new branch of, the university, a new way of looking at it. And I look a different way than a lot of the people who talk about this, and maybe sound, and I laugh a lot more. And so if that was available to anybody, then great. But yeah, for me, it became this clearing to go, hey, now you get to really, in the
Yes.
private moments, spend time with your people that are gone. And,
Yes.
and also, like you talked about, all of the things that happen in your 20s that are huge grief processes that sort of get swallowed in. And in my case, got swallowed in by, the bigger traumas and those bigger processes that I went through. But suddenly, after the book came out, I was having these real alive moments where, it was this like brushes with my brother. There was
Yes.
their guy between me and them wasn't there. The mental health advocate, the author, the service guy, the I'm lucky to breathe one breath in the middle referee gatekeeper was gone.
Yeah.
And I was having memories where I was viscerally and mentally, emotionally, physically affected by them. And
Mhm.
at first it was like, turning the lights on after a year in the dark. Like, I mean, it was just way too much
Beautiful.
for me. And I sort of retreated. And that's why I people who know me know that I kind of like curbed my own success last year. I said
Yep.
no a lot,
Yep.
and I hid in plain sight, which may be a memoir title. Um, because that's what I
What?
needed to do. Hiding
Yep.
in plain sight became that. So in a
Yep.
weird way, it did not what I wanted it to at all. It treated me that like it's a very vulnerable thing. I would never want some large scale fame in my life now. Like I didn't realize as much as I'm out there all the time and I'm trying to make people feel more connected around mental health or grief or storytelling, I've
Yes.
become a very private person. And
Right.
it became like for the first time, I remember talking to another author that you've worked with, who is an amazing book that will be on the show, and I always talk about. But Catherine Hammond, Hopeless, when she said right before her book came out, we had a Zoom, and she said, What is it going to feel like?" And I said, "I've never had the experience before where there is a very true, honest, vulnerable part of myself and my grief that could now be in rooms that I was not in." And it's another
Right.
loss of control because if they didn't like something, I couldn't explain it to them. Or if they didn't
Oh,
understand something, or they decided that it was somehow harmful to them or their grief, I wasn't there to be there for myself and what I was trying to really get at and remind everyone these are experiments. It's what
yes.
you learn in this. I'm not, on a rock telling you what grief is and how to fix it. That's literally what this isn't. But I know our wiring and our programming goes back to what's wrong with this. That's sort of
Right.
culture right now. And you're just going,
Right.
oh man, like this is like it's in rooms, it's on shelves, it's being read, it's not being read, it's a door stopper,
Right.
it's the thing that changed someone's life. Like, and I was going to bring this up later, but I came to find that what came in, like the press, the whatever, like any of that didn't matter as much as when someone who was pivotal in my process said that they trusted me enough to give it to a friend.
Right. Wow.
That's what meant the
Wow.
most to me very quickly was like, for real? And, I'm doing like 6 checks where I'm like, you don't have to give it to them if like you don't think it will actually
That's
help.
okay.
It's
Yeah.
like, no. And then getting the feedback from
Yeah.
them. And it's now I have these friends through friends who are sort of exactly what we intended. They're friends with me as a friend who gets it. And it's the
Yes.
thing I always wanted where I wasn't being asked to call some stranger because I get death. Because, that's what I want to do after 14 years of grieving is sit on a Saturday and walk someone else through the first days of grief. Like that's
Right.
heavy. It's a
Right.
lot. I would love to have the time and the bandwidth, but there was no way for me to remain resilient if I was going to be a friend who gets it literally in these
Yes.
circumstances. So the fact that that worked, the fact that we got to do that and that exists, and there can be through this book a friend who gets it. And again, I
Mm.
always say this, and I don't know if I'm like sort of like, you know, I don't know if like a therapist or a coach would say that I'm knocking myself down a bit, but even if people bought the book for someone or they bought it for themselves and it just sits there and they
Yeah.
just see it, the fact that they know that somebody gets it and it
Yeah.
exists, that has always been my driver for any sort of art, any sort of creation. Is we talked about this before when I was a little kid
Yes.
watching a movie, you have that deep breath and you go, someone somewhere gets me and they get it, and you don't need to talk about it, you don't need whatever, you just know that that character, the way that they looked away or the way they took that breath on screen, you go, somewhere someone in a writer's room somewhere knows exactly what being a
It's
human being is,
yes. Oh, yeah. I remember when the book was in design, you saying it's enough for me that the book gets seen on a coffee table because that person is going to know someone else gets it, has been through grief, and they're not alone, even by seeing that name on the spine. And I remember that. And I happened to flip to the quote from The Curious Case of Benjamin Button that you
Mm,
included early in the book. And everything in this book, by the way, and not to overuse this word, was so intentional, right? There's no waste, there's no extra, there's no yada yada. Like everything in here was so specifically chosen by you. But I love that it opens with for what it's worth. It's never too late, or in my case, too early to be whoever you want to be. There's no time limit, stop whenever you want. I feel like it's grief talking, but your
mhm.
choice of it is also you personified. You want to be there for so many people. This book is there for an infinite number of people in that way that a gift is to the world. But I wonder, knowing what you know now, sorry, I'm throwing a question out, but knowing what you know now, how can you go to next level with your desire to support and serve and go back for the others? It's never too soon. Benjamin Button says right here, it's never too late, it's never too early. When you actually tick a box, a life box this big, like I went back for the others, it would be, by anyone's stretch of imagination, this would be satisfying, you going back for the others. but I know that driver in you and the currency that is grief being constant. You must still say, it's not enough. I got to go back. There's still some others I could reach. And what's that like to
Mm,
know that your service is never done in the same way, in a really meta way, that grief is never ended, that grief is with us? So is service. And this is something you and I share, right? I made
mhm,
a lot of promises when I said to the universe, keep my son here for longer, and I will never stop talking about that we have to live for the moment, and one phone call can change everything, and one diagnosis and one dark moment. How do you Where do you go next with the service when this already is a gift to the universe? And I think I asked that in a general way, but if you want to get specific about it, I wonder where you would go next, because you got quiet a little bit after this. You got nomadic. So what have you
mhm.
decided, or are you still in the process of deciding?
Okay, first let's see if ChatGPT is back up and it can answer for me. Um,
Oh,
no, you
that
know,
was
and
at the D in Addison is for deflection.
yeah, and the thing is it's only deflection until it's not, and that's why my answer to this is in that, because what it feels like for me, first of all, when people just say, what does it feel to write a book? Everybody asks me that for like so many
Yeah,
weeks after months after
yeah,
whatever. And I literally say, like, and it's the most anticlimactic thing ever.
yep,
It's like you didn't have a book and then now you do. Like
yep,
there's
yep.
no doorway. There's no, and to be honest, the things that maybe would have made that a bigger checkbox were the things that I'm talking about that I was trying to avoid. Um,
Yes,
People who know me know from my time in the startup world and everything. Like, I mean, I'm a brand builder, I'm a positioner. I'm could work with Chris Jenner and, I have that kind of mind in a PR way as well. And I did not work for myself for one day after that book came out. I
right.
literally didn't even use my own connections that I would lovingly gift to everyone else for myself. I didn't do
Yes,
one piece of press. And if you look at my history of doing press, it was very possible.
yep.
So it was just this sort of doorway that I walked through, and it was like that was like kind of weird. Something seems different, but not really. But for me, in retrospect, now that it's been a year, and I'm happy that you asked this, because you even asked me this on our Instagram live, which people can go and find recently, and I did deflect. I think I was on a trip in London, and I remember being in that kitchen going, "Okay, we're not doing this." But in this moment, I can say that what I'm realizing right now for myself, um, is that that was sort of the first wall, and I was seeing it as like one wall or one door. Let's be more open, but one door, and then there's these other ways to do it in a way that like I said is hiding in plain sight. The way that I would want to be comfortable, the way that I would want to be supported and healed. It's not so advocate-y, it's not so frontline. This is what I'm doing so you understand you're loved. It's coming into my space and knowing that it's safe to laugh here, whether that's
Yes,
writing, film, whatever it is. Like, that idea that yeah, it's okay, like we have all of that and we've all lost someone here, and we fucking laugh our asses off in this
yep,
space. It's
yep.
it's that it's not as obvious. It's hiding in plain sight, and I think that's where my service will go. And people may not be able to put a finger on it for a long time, like, oh, he's still
Right.
doing grief advocacy, or he's still doing mental health advocacy. Completely, I'll always be willing to get on a panel to talk to. There's probably more books in me, but right now, what I'm the most interested in as a writer, a human being, is that hiding in plain sight idea of how can this, like I said, my word for you, this convergence
Yes,
occur where, you're safe without it literally being written in bold, or
yes.
that you honor not fix without it literally having to be the back of something like on your coffee table, where you get to then exist in spaces where, whoa, this show seems like it's kind of like funny and like lowball humor, but like they're hitting on something like real, that movie theater
Yeah.
moment. So that's kind of what's been, filtering down for me, and it has taken a year of just trying to make sense, because I can see these very clear sort of, I've never really had a career in that sense. I've just moved forward and kept honoring the journey professionally and personally, but I can see, different paths of where this could have gone, and how I could go, well, what's next for the author of this book and what this book does, or is it what's next for Addison? Because those are very different questions. The
Okay.
sequel to this
Okay.
book is very different than what I'm looking to do maybe in the world right now, and I think I have my fingertips on a way that a memoir makes sense to me within this learning. I have my
Mm.
fingertips on how this can translate into so many different mediums without you realizing that I'm telling the same story. And anybody who has not watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, I watched it last night, and it just hits this on the head so much where, like, it can be all of our grief stories, all of our purpose, all of our service can be everywhere, everything all at
Ah,
once. It's in all of it. And that's that convergence thing. That, and I just want to say, because I'm going to segue, and because this actually comes out today and it's Oscar season and I'm a film buff, there three trifecta of movies that have taken me down right now and just
yeah.
like serving me back to Patti Hall on a platter of what do I want to write, what do I want to do. The Fablemans, which is Spielberg's movie about sort
Ah,
of him. Please go see it in the theater if you're listening to this and it's still available. It's meant to be seen in a theater, but it will really ignite and remind you. It sort of just was like, no bullshit, Addie. You know exactly what you're here to do. It's one of those
yeah.
movies where even if you're not, it's, for me, it's right on the head because as a creator and as a filmmaker, but like, it just, you just go, what is that truest thing about you that you've always known that that's what you're here for? It
Mm-hmm.
does that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't say this word. Maybe you can because you go to Ireland all the time. But the Colin Farrell movie, um,
Banshees of Inisherin.
I literally brought up the pronunciation, and I was like, wouldn't it be funny if we learn how to say it? But that film, and I have to give credit to one of my brothers in this coffin club that I'm in. It is like, if you like right now, I'm like, just this is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. I'm like, you want to get to know me, watch that film. These two friends, where one is like, we're only here once, let's meet up at the pub every day and have a good time, and the other one's like, I need to make art before I die. And it's so
Right.
simple, but that's the two sides of me. And if I have a hunch, most of us, of why do I matter, why am I here, and also if we're only here months, and if anybody's listening to this knows death so intimately, that
Yes.
is the struggle. And that's exactly where I'm sitting, where I'm doing a lot less professionally because I skipped a lot of those personal, sitting at the pub every day 4 o'clock, really being with people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's brought up a lot, and I'm not hiding, but I am intentionally hiding in plain sight,
I
and
see, and
that's
I see
leading to
you.
something. That's leading to
Yes.
something.
There's something I was writing recently. It was around we have these three basic needs. We need to be seen, heard, and loved. I think I am quoting a friend of ours, Dr. Aaron Baker, but I'm also quoting another friend of ours, Tim Snell. And the being seen is one thing. It's until we're willing to be heard is next level. And then when we're willing to be loved. And I don't think that any next action crystallizes for us, any next relationship, next creation of art, next major move happens until those three things are there. It's very easy to allow ourselves, well, easiest to allow ourselves
Mm.
to be seen. But then there's something, and back to the Banshees of Inisherin, if you want the accent, Inisherin's not a real place, but if
It
he
is in my
wanted
heart.
he wanted to be, and although the islands off of the coast are definitely real, and so is the accent, it's pretty thick. So the juxtaposition, let me just bring it all back around. I thought that the Siobhan character in the Banshees of Inisherin, she chooses to do she chooses to rail against the waste of time and rail against the oversimplicity and the anger and the rage. She's actually railing also metaphorically against the civil war that's going on in Ireland. But she chooses to do because she knows that in the doing will come the expansion to what she was meant to be. And there's this bit about, are we small or are we large? One of the actors is, that you stay in so small and I want to be bigger than that. And Siobhan just chooses to do. In an instant, she packs her wee suitcase. She can't take her book. She's devastated that she can't take her books, but she goes to work on the mainland as a librarian. So each of us can take a small action
Mm.
or not, because when we're being seen, we're waiting for those next layers of exposure of that thing that we're meant to be. And I do think that in percolating, Siobhan wasn't willing to percolate anymore. She railed against something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're percolating as you always have been. And until you can't resist the percolation and action has to be taken, we do what we do. And I think this was a big step forward in the first year of Grief Club, but it was in service. And the next thing has to serve you. And that's going to be a line that's really difficult for you to cross. It's very difficult for me to cross. My next book has to be in service of me, which is why I'm still sitting on the follow-up to Loving Large.
Mm.
And because I can't imagine writing for myself, even though I coach brilliant authors every day to do exactly that. When you can't resist the need to do your next thing because it means being seen, heard, and loved, you'll do it. And until then, you wait.
Woo! Yes. 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 Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And stay away from sheep shears. I just want to say that.
Yeah, I know it's such a spoiler alert. And I just like, I'm like, and then like,
Yeah,
I love it. And it doesn't fall into the trap. And it's all there in so many ways. And that is real life. I won't give a spoiler alert, but for those two men and a dog to be back on the beach at a certain point, yeah, all of it happened and all of it will happen again. And we'll all just keep trying to make sense of this thing. And it's going to
yes,
kind of send us in different ways. But that is like our deepest connecting point. And for so many people try to use that to separate from each other. But our
right.
deepest connecting point is that we're all getting it wrong, trying to figure it out,
Oh yeah, oh
and
yeah.
that, I mean, to get that so simply, but so well hidden in any piece of art or writing, or is just like, oh yeah, that's right there. And it's so rare that I get to like speak of something of the moment where,
Mm,
this isn't going to be of 6 months later. But so it's like it's
yeah.
really cool that in many ways I'm returning to my roots after like being on that book tour and being all over, like, being back in Los
Yes.
Angeles, but dropping into like Oscar season, like it's all the old things. And then these three movies are like going like, this is exactly that,
Yes.
this is exactly that. And I think it's there. We have to pin a tail on this whole donkey.
Right.
We might need to have a part two, but so I'm gonna mix some things because I'm not.
Okay.
I mean, we've laughed the whole way, like, but find the funny is
Which we do.
non-negotiable. So I'm just gonna say, you can share what's making you laugh, where you go to find the funny, especially on your griefiest days. I will say that this
Mhm.
morning, to how I was feeling physically, I was feeling mentally, feeling emotionally. I practice what I preach. It may not work for everyone, but humor is my number one tool in my grief resilience kit. It just is, and I just don't question it anymore. I don't know them, and I would love to know them, but Tig and Cheryl, True Story, the podcast where they basically try to talk through documentaries that they've seen, but by the end you question whether, kind of a lot like They Need to Pin the Tail on the Donkey for sure. But if I listen to that, and thank God it comes out every week, and I'm going to send this to them so that hopefully they just keep making it so that I can keep talking about sad things, because if they don't do the funny thing first, I can't come on here. But you're just like giggling, and like anything that gets me to that place, to then come on, it's like sort of this evening out thing where, I'm coming
Yeah.
from that laughter and
Mhm.
going, yeah, we're going to go in and we're going to get back out. And, but I just like, people DM me and ask me like, well, where do you like literally find the funny? And since this episode is of the moment, I just want to say that Smart List, the podcast, the way the three of
Oh, I don't
them,
know that one. I don't know that
it's
one.
with Sean Hayes, Will Arnett, and Jason Bateman.
Oh, of course. Of
Yeah,
course.
the way that they kind of just, hang out with each other basically for us all to enjoy. Like it's just, if you can't get to friends, if you can't get around people who get it like that, like,
Mm.
that kind of fun, it's very romantic, but you just like leave with the feeling as if you've hung out with friends. And so I just wanted to, I don't know, those, without being able to sort of listen to
Mhm.
those two podcasts going into some of the heaviness we touch on this show and
Yeah.
coming out of it, my show
Yeah.
wouldn't exist. So thanks, Jason Bateman, for making sure Grief Club, the podcast, exists. And of course, Tig and Cheryl. What about you? Where do you
Do you know
find the
what it is?
funny?
And I won't be able to. I have about five women in England, I'm just going to say, that make me gut barrel laugh. And it's always on Instagram and it's always for different reasons. But women who get older, middle adulthood shit is just
Mm.
making me howl lately. And I will tell you, and we will tag right here. Mandy Leto is my source on all things funny and is the only person that can make me pee myself just a little almost every day by messaging me. But because Mandy's a Canadian living in the UK, she finds the comedians that make me howl. So it is always an Instagram meme that somebody sends to me because I don't know, people just know my sick sense of humor is fantastic. So women that get middle adulthood in female bodies. That's what I'm laughing at right now, because it is, you can't know yourself. You don't know what you're going to feel like the next day. And did you notice that that doesn't behave the way it used to? And your boobs don't point in the same direction anymore. I laugh my ass off at women who send me stuff like that. So send Patti the funny memes about menopause all the time.
I was gonna say there's something really there in social media too, where I've been saying lately, like the whole thing that happened around White Lotus, same thing
Yeah.
where, but
Yeah.
I'm like, but when you start to use these references in a way where like somebody really gets this though, like it's what I was
Oh,
talking about
yeah.
earlier, where you're like, you can say a lot of things about social media, but there is times where, yeah, I'm laughing so
So
hard, or they've like
hard.
taken a video of a kid doing something and it just like,
Oh,
it gets you. And
baby elephants. Like if you're not laughing at baby elephants falling over when because they can somersault like nobody's business, then there's something wrong. So I give that. And yeah, I've been spending too much time going down the IG rabbit hole. I admit it, but I know that I'm searching for the next laugh.
okay. So I was going to ask you
Mm.
about which is usually when I'm like, ha ha ha, ha, thank you for coming. But we need loot bags because,
Yes.
um,
What's in our loot bag, Addison?
well, that's what I was going to ask you. Because one thing I was going to
Yep.
say as we were wrapping
Yep.
up on the whole, how does it feel to have a book thing is that's
Yep.
why I call it Book Baby. I don't really call it my book. I don't call it, it's become this other thing that like, like
Yeah.
a kid, like now it's like at university and it comes back and it's like, oh, this person's really cool. And we connected, like, it does its own thing.
Yeah.
But I know that there is a stage, especially for the people who have maybe been reading for a year, who will be
Yep.
excited about this episode because the podcast obviously is behind in time in terms of that timeline,
Right.
with the
Right.
deeper dives. But if you were to put in someone's loot bag, and we'll keep this brief, we've got to pin the tail on this donkey. But I think the amount of times when I've explained my grief to somebody and they have responded blank face, well, you should write a book.
Right.
Like people just say that to people all the time whenever they've gone through something that
Uh,
other people don't understand or feel impossible. Like
no, they don't, Addison. Okay, just letting you know, they say it to you all the time.
they say that. I hear people, oh, you should write a, okay, maybe. Okay, but on the flip side too, it can be a very confusing point in the purpose part of grief where
Yep.
does this story need to be told? And it can come from sort of a guilt place. It can come from a I don't want them to be dead place. It can come from a this hurt so bad that it needs to exist in another form.
Yep.
But that's why I wanted to kind of ask you if people are like, a lot of people ask me, my most common question for you, we could do
Yep.
another whole episode of what people want me to ask you, for you. But
Yeah.
when do you know if it's like I should write a book or like, you know, it's the real damn thing. You've got some art to let spill out of your chest, and it's time to call
Mm.
Patti. What would you say is like sort of people's like compass? Let's put that in their loot bag.
It has to be so irresistible, so so beyond a compulsion or an idea that it's in your breath. It's in everything you do. It is so constant. It's bigger than love. It's stronger than hunger. It is, I will never be me if I don't do this, because it takes such a powerful why to come to the page. Then you need that why every day. You needed that why every day for, hello, Tundra. You need that why every single day. So if the why is so loud, you can't think past it, talk past it, live past it, drink past it, sleep past it, it's time to write a book. And what you need is to find a person that will say to you, it's time, when it's time. And the right person will tell you when it's too soon. And the caveat to that is you can't write when you're in it. You can write, but you can't write a book that would be in service of your experience, meaning in service of someone else eventually, because you haven't had time to analyze. So if you feel that, oh my God, what I'm going through right now, I know this is a book, I know this is a book, I know this is a book. If you're still actively getting through feelings that you can't think straight through, that you're actively needing daily therapy for, that you are, let me give some other examples, that you're in a relationship you fear is narcissistic, if you are in a work relationship that you feel where you're being bullied, if you're still in it, you can't make meaning of it yet.
Mm.
So the timing of the book is secondary to knowing that you have to. I really, really believe that people know this is going to be a book. I'm going to have to write about this. I need to share this. But the second part is the when. We aren't in control of the when. We cannot write when we are in hot pursuit of surviving what we're in.
Mm-hmm. So nothing is more true. Okay, and no explanations allowed. Put one movie, one book, and one podcast in the loot bag for people.
Okay, what was the first one? One
One
book,
movie.
one movie. One movie, I got to tell you, Banshees of Inisherin, I'm going to put it in my loot bag because all the people around me had negative things to say, and I thought it was pure art. Pure
Yes.
art.
People told me not to go to the theater. Sorry, I
I
know I said no
thought,
explanation,
and
but I was upset.
I am a major, major lover of that
Also, Irish
podcast.
humor is the same as British humor. Yeah,
Irish,
yeah, yeah. It's
that's
it's
true.
so good, so good.
Irish humor, very, very important. Okay, so there was a now podcast, anything that is serialized. So I love there's a Canadian podcast called, forgive me if I get it wrong, Someone Knows Something.
Mm.
That is one of my favorites, and that is taking a cold case that may have that usually happened around here and unpacking the what was known and what was not known. My brain loves that puzzle piecing. Sorry
I
for the
love that.
explanation.
And one book.
So unfair.
One book that you've helped make exist
Mm,
for Grief Club people.
mm.
It could be your own. Now I'm a
Okay,
momager.
I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm actually gonna say it because I revealed it last night that I have had a book of my own in the works for 6 or 8 months and I've never revealed it until last night on Substack. Here it is. So,
Elements.
Elements. So I took my desire for people to life write, to go deep in their own writing, and I turned my view of it as a layered approach based from scene to meaning. And I used the 4 elements of earth, fire, air, water, and I created a way of writing scenes to turn them into full meaning making exercises. And that will come out in another couple of months. What it means is that every day I test, am I right about this, that it can change the way people look at their writing. So they're elements, reframing writing inspiration, one reflection at a time.
I love that. We are the worst hosts ever. We're putting things in your loot bag that you have to
That you
buy.
can't have.
It requires deep healing or you have to wait.
Right. In the
But you can go
meantime,
see that movie. Go see
yes,
that movie.
you can go see that movie. We're terrible. Yeah, and search for the Canadian crime podcast. There you go. We're
All right,
terrible.
you mentioned your Substack. We'll put that link in there. Where do people
Yeah.
find you to send you these DMs of menopausal women?
Okay, everything PattiMHall.com. Everything is Patti M Hall. I have a not a contact me page. I think it's like oh my gosh, I won't. There's a spot there where you can like fill out this thing talking to me about your story. Drop me, you're crazy. Who's writing about menopause in a way? Who's clever? Who's got a podcast? Who's reframing menopause for women who really want to laugh about it?
You can't hear it, but just so you know, the playoff music has already started. Thank you so much for coming today, Patti. Happy birthday, book baby.
Happy birthday, book baby.
Everybody go find Patti and you'll have as much fun as we did today.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. Well, Grief Club, that's the show. If you enjoyed it, please let us know by liking and leaving a review. This will help as many people who may need what we're talking about find it the fastest. Remember to honor the journey, and when that gets tough, find the funny.